I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome back. I wanted to start off today a little bit differently. If you have been enjoying this podcast and you want to keep listening to this podcast, please hit the subscribe button. If you've heard even one thing on this show that has made you go, please share it. We cover so many life-changing topics here, and this episode is particularly special. People deserve to know about it. So, I wanted to ask you something today. And it's a question that you may have assumed that you knew the answer to, or maybe it's something that you never really asked yourself. And that is, how do you know if you need healing? Like, actually know. Because we see it everywhere now, healing this, healing that, shadow work, inner child, trauma responses, triggers. It's all over our feeds. And maybe you've scrolled past it 100 times thinking, that's not really me, though. Nothing really bad happened to me when I was growing up. Or maybe something did happen, but you've been telling yourself that you're fine, that you've moved on, you're functioning, you show up, you do the work, you take care of everybody around you, so you must be fine, right? Well, here's what I come to understand. And that is that unhealed trauma doesn't always look like falling apart. Sometimes it looks like never being able to slow down. Sometimes it looks like being the most dependable person in the room while quietly feeling empty inside. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism or people pleasing or feeling a little bit on edge all the time for no reason that you can quite put your finger on. And sometimes it looks incredibly functional from the outside. So today, we're going to slow down and actually answer the question that nobody talks about. What does it look like to be unhealed? What does it feel like? And why do so many of us not even realize that we're still carrying something? Because you deserve more than just being told to heal. You deserve to actually understand what's happening inside you with compassion and not judgment. So let's get into it. Welcome to Jotindi, Journey to the Inner Divine, a sacred space for healing energy, emotional release, and soulful transformation. If you're ready to live with joy, ease, and purpose, you're in the right place. So, before we talk about symptoms or signs, I want you to understand something very important. None of this is your fault. The patterns that you're carrying, or the ways that you react, the things that feel impossible to change, they didn't come out of nowhere. They were learned, and they were learned for a very good reason. Here's what's happening underneath it all. When we're children, our brains and our nervous systems are still developing. And during that development, our earliest experiences become the foundation of how we understand the world, how we understand safety, how we understand relationships and ourselves. And when trauma enters the picture during those early years, whether that's through abuse or neglect or loss or instability, or even just growing up in a home where love felt conditional or unpredictable, your brain does something that's actually incredibly intelligent. It adapts. But here's the thing about those adaptations. They're built for survival and not thriving. So a child's brain isn't asking, how do I build a healthy relationship someday? It's asking, how do I get through today? How do I stay safe or keep the peace? Or how do I make sure that I'm still loved? And children don't have the capacity to fully process what's happening to them the way that adults can. So instead of processing it, they internalize it, they carry it. And very often they blame themselves for it. Because think about it. If I'm the problem, then maybe I can fix it, right? Maybe I can be better or quieter or smaller or more helpful or more perfect. And then everything will be okay. Does that sound familiar? Because that right there, that's not a character flaw. That's just a child doing the absolute best that she could with what she had. And the coping mechanisms that developed alongside that, the people pleasing, the hypervigilance, the emotional walls, or the need for control, those weren't mistakes either. They were protective strategies. They helped you survive when things felt unsurvivable. So when we talk about healing, we're not talking about tearing those parts of yourself down or being ashamed of them. No, we honor them. We honor them first. Okay. We recognize what they did for us. And then gently, we begin to ask whether they're still serving us today. Because you're no longer a child that needs to survive. And healing begins the moment that you start to actually believe that. So here's where it gets really interesting. And honestly, this might be the part of the episode where some of you start to go, oh, because one of the biggest reasons that people don't seek healing is because they don't realize that they need it. And it's not denial or weakness. It's actually a very normal, a very human response to pain that started really early in life. I mean, think about it this way. If you grew up in an environment that was chaotic or unpredictable, emotionally unsafe, right? That was just Tuesday. That was normal. Your nervous system didn't flag it as chaos because it never knew anything different. It just adapted and kept going and called it life. So as adults, a lot of us are walking around carrying things that we don't even have a name for because we normalize them so young, so completely that we can't even see it anymore. And then there's everything in our life that's layered on top of that. Okay. There's like the family secrets and the things that nobody talk about, or the unspoken rule that what happens in this house stays in this house. Or you have the cultural messaging that said, just get over it, or be grateful, or stop being so sensitive. Or other people have it so much worse. Maybe you were even praised for being the strong one, or for not needing much, or for handling everything without falling apart. And so you learned very early on that your pain wasn't something to be acknowledged, it was just something to be managed quietly and alone. And so you did. And then years later, you find yourself struggling in your relationships, in your mind, in your body. And instead of connecting it to what you've carried, you just turn it inward. You make it about you, about who you are, right? I'm just an anxious person, or I'm too sensitive. I'm bad at relationships. I used to say that a lot. I'm controlling, or I'm lazy, or I'm broken. And I want to stop you right there because what if none of those things are actually character flaws? What if they're actually survival responses? Intelligent, adaptive, protective survival responses that your nervous system developed to keep you safe. And then it simply never got the signal that it was okay to stand down. Okay, that's not brokenness. That's just a nervous system that never got the chance to rest. And there's a profound difference between those things. So, if you've been hard on yourself, or if you've been carrying shame about the way that you show up or the ways that you struggle, I want you to hear this, okay? Hear it. You were never broken. You were just responding. So, give yourself some grace. Okay, so now let's talk about what this actually looks like in real life. Because sometimes the most powerful thing someone can hear is a description of their own experience said out loud by someone who gets it. So, I want to walk through some of the signs that you might be carrying unhealed trauma. And as I go through these, I want you to resist the urge to diagnose yourself or spiral. This is not about labeling yourself. This is about awareness. And awareness is always the first step towards freedom. So, let's start with relationships because that's where so much of this shows up first. So, do you find yourself constantly trying to make everyone around you comfortable, even at the expense of your own needs? Maybe you're always smoothing things over or trying to keep the peace or making sure that nobody's upset with you. That's people pleasing. And it feels like kindness from the outside, But on the inside, it's actually exhausting because it's not coming from a place of genuine generosity. It's coming from fear. Fear that if you stop, you won't be loved, which means you won't be safe and that you're not enough. Maybe you struggle with boundaries, not because you don't know what they are, but because enforcing them fills you with guilt or anxiety. Maybe the idea of someone being disappointed in you feels absolutely unbearable. I used to struggle with boundaries because I felt like if I set them, I would be abandoned and then I would be alone. Maybe you find yourself drawn to people who need saving, or you stay in relationships long past the point of where they stopped being healthy because leaving feels more frightening than staying. Or maybe it's opposite. Maybe you keep everyone at arm's length because getting close feels dangerous. Because love, in your experience, has always come with pain or conditions or loss. And here's one that I think is so important to name. Some of you are incredibly gifted at reading people, almost like unnervingly good at it. You can walk into a room and immediately sense the energy. You can hear a slight shift in someone's tone of voice and just know something's off. Or you can tell when someone's upset before they've even said a single word. I even came across one person who shared that they could interpret someone's mood just from the sound of their footsteps. And I want you to hear this, okay? That's not a superpower that you're just born with. That's what happens when you spend years needing to monitor your environment for emotional danger. Your nervous system became finely tuned to threat detection because at some point it had to be. And unfortunately, that's not a gift. That's a wound that learned to look like a gift. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about control. Because a lot of unhealed people become very, very good at controlling their environment and themselves. So this can sometimes show up as perfectionism, like nothing's ever quite good enough. You push yourself relentlessly, and the finish line just keeps moving. Because somewhere deep down, perfect feels like the only thing standing between you and something going wrong. Maybe it shows up as hyper independence. Maybe you don't ask anyone for help. You handle everything yourself, and you'd rather struggle in silence than let someone see that you need something. Because needing things, in your experience, wasn't safe. Maybe change feels genuinely terrifying to you, even good change, even change that you wanted. Because your nervous system learned that when things shift, it usually meant something bad was coming. And maybe you're always just a little bit on edge, like you're waiting. Like you don't even know what exactly you're waiting for, but your body's braced for it. Maybe you hear a door that closes a little bit louder than usual and your whole system responds before your mind even registers what happened. And that's not you being dramatic. It's called hypervigilance, and it's exhausting to live in. Now let's talk about your emotions. And some of you feel everything intensely, overwhelmingly, in waves that feels impossible to manage sometimes. And some of you feel nothing. You're numb, you're disconnected, you're going through the motions, but not quite present in your own life. And I want you to know that both of those are actually trauma responses. Being emotionally flooded and being emotionally shut down are two sides of the same coin. Your nervous system either learned to turn the volume all the way up or all the way down. And neither one means that you're too much, and neither one means that you're broken. Some of you are also quietly carrying very deep feelings of shame. And not necessarily about anything specific, right? Just this low hum of I am fundamentally not okay. There's something wrong with me. I'm too much, or I'm not enough, or I'm just somehow just broken. That shame is not the truth about who you are. That shame is a story that was written for you before you were even old enough to question it. How this shows up in your behaviors. Sometimes unhealed trauma doesn't show up in how we feel, but it does show up in what we do. It can look like reaching for something to take the edge off, like a drink or a substance or food, or even scrolling. Anything that creates a moment of relief from the discomfort that lives underneath. It can look like overexercising or disordered eating, or using the body as the one thing that you feel like you can control. It can look like staying in situations that you know aren't good for you, like jobs or friendships or relationships, because as painful as they are, they're familiar. And familiar feels safer than the unknown, even when the unknown might actually be better. And here's another thing I want you to sit with. Sometimes people don't recognize their coping mechanisms because the coping mechanisms have become their personality. It became so woven into the fabric of who you are that you stopped seeing it as something that you were doing to survive, and it just became you. But it's not you. It's a strategy, and strategies can change. Okay, and finally, we have how this shows up in your body. Because your nervous system doesn't just live in your mind, right? It lives in every single cell of your being. So sometimes people who have unresolved trauma feel chronic fatigue that sleep doesn't fix. Or like me, they have nightmares constantly. Sometimes they wake up feeling tense already, even though there's nothing to be tense about. You just woke up. Some have unexplained physical symptoms that doctors can't quite pin down, or a body that never fully relaxes, that's always like slightly braced and slightly ready for something to go down. Because here's what's happening: your body is still responding as if the danger is present, even if the danger ended years ago, even if you're totally safe now. Your nervous system hasn't gotten that memo yet. And that's not a weakness. That's just a body that's been working incredibly hard for a very long time. And she probably deserves some rest. Now, I want to talk about something that confuses a lot of people. And it's something that can actually make you question your own experience. And that's the last thing that we want to do right now. Because some of you didn't struggle right away. Maybe something happened and you just got through it, or you kept going. You functioned, you built a life. And for a while, maybe a really long while, you were okay, or at least you seemed okay. And then one day, seemingly out of nowhere, you just weren't anymore. And instead of recognizing that as a trauma response, you told yourself, this doesn't make sense. That was so long ago. I should be over this by now. Why am I falling apart now? Well, can I tell you something? That's one of the most common experiences in trauma recovery. And it makes complete sense when you understand what's actually happening. Because survival mode is actually an incredible thing. When we're in the middle of a difficult, dangerous, or overwhelming circumstance, our system kicks into kind of autopilot. It does exactly what it needs to get us through. It pushes down what can't be processed right now, and it keeps us moving. It keeps us functioning because it has to, right? That's survival. But what's so important to understand is that just because something got pushed down doesn't mean that it went away. It just means that it got stored. It got stored in your body, in your nervous system, in the parts of you that were waiting, maybe for years, for a moment when it finally felt safe enough to surface. And sometimes that moment comes when your life finally slows down, when the crisis ends, maybe when you leave the difficult situation, when you finally exhale, or maybe it comes up right when things start looking up and start going really good in your life and you finally get a chance to breathe, then it pops up. That's when it rises. And it's not because you're broken or you're weak or anything like that. It's just because some part of you finally felt safe enough to feel it. And that's actually your nervous system doing exactly what it's supposed to do, even though it can, believe me, be pretty annoying at times. Sometimes some of the delayed responses that show up can include intrusive memories or thoughts or images that seem to come out of nowhere and pull you right back into something that you thought you'd left behind years ago. Maybe there's a flashback that feels incredibly real and present, even though you're physically safe. Or maybe you experience some dissociation, that feeling of being totally disconnected from yourself, from your body, or the world around you, like you're watching your life through a pane of glass. You might experience a kind of continuous distress that doesn't seem to have an off switch, like you can't find rest even when it's available, like your nervous system forgot how to be still. And that can be really disorienting because from the outside, and even from your own perspective, everything should be fine now, right? The storm has passed, it's over. So why does it feel like you're still standing in the rain? And that's because healing isn't linear, and safety doesn't automatically undo what survival required. Your nervous system learned to live in the storm, and learning to live in the calm, that's part of the healing work too. So if this is you, if you have found yourself struggling over something that happened a really long time ago, please release the timeline that you think you should be on. There's no expiration date on pain. There's no deadline on healing. You are exactly where you're supposed to be. Okay, I need you to take a breath with me for a second. Because if you've been listening to this episode, maybe nodding along, if you've been recognizing yourself in these words, or if something in your chest has been quietly pulling at you, maybe whispering that sounds like me. First, I want you to know that took courage. Just listening to this episode, just allowing yourself to see it, that is not a small thing. And second, I want you to hear this with every part of you. I've said it before in this episode. I'm going to say it again in other episodes. You are not broken. The patterns that you've been carrying, the ways that you've been coping, the survival strategies that have shaped so much of your life, they're not evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with you. They're evidence that you went through something really hard and you adapted and you survived. And that's actually remarkable because here's what I also know. Surviving is not the same thing as living. And you were not put on this earth just to simply endure a life. You were meant for peace, for joy, for relationships that feel safe, for a mind that isn't constantly braced for impact, and a body that knows how to rest, for a version of yourself that doesn't have to work so hard just to feel okay. And that version of you, she's not out of reach. Healing is not about becoming a completely different person, and it's not about erasing your past or pretending that it didn't happen. It's about helping your mind and your body and your emotions finally experience enough safety to begin loosening the grip of patterns that protected you then, but are keeping you stuck now. It's about going back for the parts of you that got left behind and bringing them home. It starts with compassion and not shame or judgment, and not pushing harder or demanding more from yourself, but compassion. You don't need to heal by hating the parts of you that learned to cope. You heal by finally giving them what they were looking for: safety, understanding, love. So, where do you go from here? Well, you start with the awareness, which you've just begun by listening to this episode today. You start to recognize the areas of your life that need attention. You start noticing your patterns without immediately judging them. You get curious instead of critical. You explore what nervous system regulation feels like for your body. Maybe that's through breath work or meditation or movement or rest. You start building a relationship with yourself that feels safe, learning to trust yourself again, setting boundaries not out of anger, but out of self-respect, allowing yourself to receive support. And speaking of support, I want to offer you something. If you heard any of yourself in this episode, if something shifted today and you're wondering, okay, this is great, but where do I even start? I would love to talk with you. I'm offering you a free 30-minute discovery call where we can get together, just you and me, and talk about where you are right now, what you're carrying, what your healing could look like for you specifically, and then what the next right step on your journey is. And it's no pressure, it's not a pitch, it's just a real conversation with someone who genuinely wants to see you step into the life that you deserve. You can find the link to book your call in the show notes, or you can go to mariahaurora.com and find it there. It just takes 2 minutes to schedule the call, and it could be the conversation that changes everything for you. Because I know this to be true. You found this podcast for a reason. You listened to this episode for a reason. That little voice inside of you that said, I need to hear this, that's the wisest part of you. And she's been waiting a long time for you to listen to her. So let this be the moment. And not someday, not when things calm down, not when you feel more ready, but now. Because you're worth it right now, exactly as you are. Now, before I let you go today, I want to circle back to the very beginning. We opened with a question. Do I even need healing? And my hope is that by now, something in you has an answer. Maybe it's a quiet yes. Maybe it's a hesitant maybe. And maybe it's a flood of recognition that you're still processing. But whatever it is, honor that. Because that answer, however it showed up for you today, is the beginning. And I believe with everything in me that you did not stumble across this episode by accident. I believe that nothing is accidental. And if you found this, if you listened to this all the way to the end, if something in these words resonated somewhere deep in your bones, that was not a coincidence. That was the wisest, most knowing part of you pulling you toward what you need. The universe has a way of placing exactly the right thing in front of us at exactly the right moment. And maybe today, this was yours. So trust that. Trust that pull that you felt. Trust the stirring in your chest. Trust that the fact that you're even asking this question means that you're already on your way. Healing's not a destination that you arrive at all at once. It's a journey that you choose. You choose it over and over again with compassion, with patience, and with the quiet knowing that you are always worthy of it because you were and you are always worthy of it. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being brave enough to listen. And thank you for choosing yourself today, even in this small but sacred way. Until next time, don't forget, there is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path.